Hello, right, we're going to talk about A Christmas Carol, and we are going to start off with the classic Solitary as an Oyster. I'm saying words, but my husband, Mr. Stephen, is also saying words because we're both English teachers, and two English teachers are better than one. So today you get two English teachers for one video.
Hello.
Hello. Right, so starting with Solitary as an Oyster, it is a simile, a zoomorphic simile that quite often people like to talk about. It's a good one to describe Scrooge at the start of the novella.
When you do your revision, when you're thinking about which quotations to use in an exam, some people will tell you to try and find quotations other people aren't talking about. But you'll quite often find the reason that so many people talk about certain quotes is because they're good quotes. And the way to make you stand out isn't to pick a quotation no one else is using, it's to do something extra with the quotation that everybody else is using, and then you'll stand out. So that's what we're hoping to support you in doing today.
So we're going to go through it pretty much in the order that you would write about it. Now that's quite important, the way you structure your response. If you were writing about Solitary as an Oyster for your AO2 paragraph talking about language, you're going to want to start with the simplest ideas first, and you're almost going to have, you're saying the simplest things and your examiner's heard it, and then the further on you go, you're going to find that they're hearing that less and less, and by the end you're probably going to be saying things that they're never hearing at all. So this order is important. We're going to start off with the adjective solitary. So in Solitary as an Oyster is described as being solitary. That means to be alone, existing by yourself, which is obviously how Scrooge is existing at the start of the novella. But it also links to a quote from Stave 2, where Scrooge is at school and is described as being a solitary child, neglected by his friends. Dickens is trying to emphasise, not just in this book, but in a lot of his books, the importance of childhood and the impact that it has on you as an adult. So we get the sense that because he's mistreated as a child and is isolated and alone as a child, that's influenced massively how he behaves as an adult. The Victorians thought that the idea of that childhood was like this idyllic, perfect time, and actually through multiple novels, including this one, Dickens tries to challenge that. Actually, if you were not particularly wealthy, your child would be really, really challenging and have massive impact on your life as an adult.
Okay, so first of all, we're going to look at the noun oyster. I'm just going to reiterate what Mrs. Stevens said about I'm going to say the easiest things to start with, but that's your foundation. Do not miss this bit out and jump straight to the clever. You must put this in because this is the most obvious thing. And if you don't put this, an examiner might think you misunderstand the simile. So the noun, the oyster, the obvious thing is it is a creature with a hard shell, a hard exterior, that suggests that Scrooge has got a hard exterior. It also has the ability to open. It takes some force to open for someone else to open it, but actually it can choose to open up at any time. And the reason it's got that hard shell on the outside is because it's got a soft inside. And again, this is foreshadowing that later on we find out that Scrooge is quite a sensitive character. He's got that vulnerability, that softness inside.
And potentially that hardness, that sort of hard exterior is growing through the challenges that we see, particularly in Stave 2. So the mistreated as a child, the loss of Belle, that all those things, and he's shut himself off and he's choosing to kind of protect himself.
The other thing about oysters is they do live in colonies, so that there's lots and lots of oysters on the riverbed. I think they live in estuaries, the mouth of the river, and there's lots and lots of them, but they live a solitary life. Even though they're surrounded by other oysters, they live on their own, and this represents Scrooge living in the growing metropolis of London, surrounded by loads and loads of people, but he's not interacting with them.
Okay, so let's focus in on the pearl. Lots of things to say about the pearl. On the one hand, obviously pearls are valuable, they're precious, valuable things, and this could be an indication of Scrooge keeping his wealth to himself. He doesn't share it, he doesn't spend it on himself, he's just locked it away and he's keeping it to himself. Alternatively, it could be foreshadowing the fact that by the end of the novella, in Scrooge, we've got a character who is valuable to society, that he's got that potential to be worthwhile and precious to the people around him. We've also got lots of ways in which pearls link to heaven. Chances are, if you've been taught by either me or Mr. Stephen, we spoke to you about the idea that this is a Christian redemption story. This is all about somebody who's not living an appropriate Christian life, and then by the end he is. So we've got two ways in which the pearl represents heaven. The first one, this is from the parable of the pearl, and in that parable, heaven is referred to as being like a pearl, a thing really valuable and worthwhile. And then another point from Revelation 21:21, we've got the idea of the pearly gates, and that's the gateway to heaven, and it's described again through the use of the pearl. So Dickens's use of this zoomorphic simile with this animal that contains a pearl is certainly linking to that idea of the Christian redemption story.
Okay, we've talked through this bit. I went early, didn't I, before we got to this slide. But again, reiterates the fact that they live in these large groups and they don't interact with each other. They never. An oyster lives its entire life on its own, and that is Scrooge's choice. That is his future if he doesn't change. These events don't happen. Okay, and the final point we're going to talk about is a point from Charles Dickens' first novel, The Pickwick Papers. But also, it's an AO3 point because it talks about what London was like at the time. Now, these days, oysters are considered something that you might have if you go out for quite a fancy meal. But in those days, it was a staple diet of the poor. The reason for that is in London, there's no grass area to grow meat, but there are lots of rivers. The River Thames has lots of tributaries that go into it, and at the mouth of each one, you get these oyster beds. So oysters became the main protein for the poor. And the quote that's from the Pickwick Papers from Charles Dickens is he says that poverty and oysters always seem to go together. So by describing Scrooge as this staple protein of the poor, it foreshadows that he has the ability to feed the poor. It suggests that that money he has could feed the poor, and obviously that undermines the Malthusian theory, which I'm sure you've spoken about. And it's saying he's got the wealth that could be shared, and of course that's shown later on, right at the end of day 5, and the first thing he does when he changes is he buys the food for the Cratchit family.